aka having to eat, or aka staying out of danger. But the specific example that I'm giving is, let's say, in a situation like this, where there isn't necessarily any danger, and you have to come to a deductive conclusion from a sound argument, a set of premises that lead to a conclusion.
Yeah.
Given the fact that evolution doesn't explain away how a mind is going to be rational to come to deductive truths in a state where there is no danger, how do you conclude that this argument that you're giving is sound?
Well, I would then argue that given that there's so many situations where it is useful, those same principles of your mind to take a situation, derive a conclusion, those can be extrapolated into situations where there's no evolutionary pressure. So if you have to decide, what clothes you're going to buy online, that might be the similar drivers in the mind as to what groceries you're going to buy next week. So there are similar logical reasoning frameworks that are designed for daily tasks that also favor you in other aspects that don't have evolutionary pressure.
Okay, so when it comes to this response, the only issue I would have is that it would mostly be ad hoc. So when it comes to a response being ad hoc, what we're basically saying is that the only reason you're positing this solution is to get away from the seemingly problem that arises, and that is the only reason why you're positing that solution. So you're saying that, well, hold on, we have good reason to believe that the mind is a good way to avoid danger when it comes to evolution, and therefore that must be applied in every single scenario, even when it's not for danger. But you're only positing that to get around the problem. If it wasn't for the problem, you wouldn't be committed to that. So that's why, although there's no formal issue within what you're saying, the issue will still be that the response will be ad hoc. It will be out of the very fact that if there is, out of the fact that if the mind doesn't come to true conclusions outside of evolution, then there will be an epistemic problem. You understand?
The mind doesn't come to logical conclusions outside of
evolutionary schemes.
Rephrase that maybe?
For example, so you're saying that, well, because the mind is fit enough to avoid danger, and we see it work well in this aspect, therefore, out of danger, it should also be the same criteria, the same methodology. But what I'm saying is that under a naturalistic approach, you're not justified in that. You're only saying this to get out of the seeming problem that there is no epistemic justification in the mind being able to come to true conclusions.
Yeah.
Right?
I would basically say that because there's less pressure on solutions that are outside of this evolutionary pressure.
Yes.
There's a lot more freedom in these decisions because you can.
So how do you know that the mind guarantees truth when it comes to these arguments?
There's no guarantee because there is no pressure on all these solutions. You're just whatever you decide, it's not going to disfavor you massively or favor you massively. So you can come to a lot of different conclusions. And today's society is not so much built around survival because there's so many different patterns you could take. So there's a lot more situations where there might be less pressure on specifically always taking the right and a true conclusion. So, but I think in general the framework still holds in that the mind is evolved to make these most favorable solutions in complex situations.
Okay.
So,
So,
I think the rational mind is still kind of one of the most useful frameworks to keep in mind when you think about it. I'm not against religion. I think religion is super interesting and plays a hugely important role in society.
Yeah.
But it's also one of these frameworks that allows you to derive to
true
useful conclusions.
Right. The thing is, and I think we've come to an agreement now, I just don't believe that useful is always going to be interchangeable with true.
Yeah.
Because something can be unuseful in a sense and still be true, aka corresponds to reality.
Yeah. But how do you know that a religious framework is true?
Good. So when it comes, the same way that you argued for agnosticism, which is that under abduction, we look at the set of data and we posit that the best way to explain away the data would not only be religion in generality, but also specifically about Islam. And we're going to get to that in a second. Are you okay? Would you guys like to discuss? Or?
Yeah, we're just listening.
Yeah?
We're listening.
So specifically regarding Muhammad, for example, the Prophet. If we see claims that he makes, for example, about the future events to come, or we see claims that he makes about the foreseeable past that he didn't have access to, nor did have the means to access it, naturalistic explanations don't actually explain away the data.
Didn't know that it was wrong
They
to
don't-
marry a
they don't
say that that's the source of truth, so that is something you have to follow.
exactly. So, for example, we have the Quran, chapter 44, verse number 29, make a polemic against ancient Egyptians regarding when the pharaoh dies, that the heavens and the earth are going to weep over him.
Yeah.
Thing is, we only come to that conclusion in 1799 when we discovered what is known as the Rosetta Stone, and then we're able to translate the pyramid text to come to that conclusion. So we have someone who's a 7th century illiterate, doesn't travel, who seemingly came to this conclusion that is very specific, yet naturalistic explanation on the abduction don't explain away the data. So if we have abduction, so aka we have multiple hypotheses, we posit all the natural hypotheses in one end, we posit a supernatural hypothesis one end, seemingly, if the natural hypothesis don't explain away the data, what we're left with is the supernatural hypothesis posted by the Quran, essentially. And then under that, we would then say that abduction explains away the data better.
Yeah. I'm not going to argue anything against the Quran or Muhammad. That's outside of my,
But I think it's just important that if you have this data set, so for example, you are familiar with a specific data set, and then you come to that conclusions.
Yeah.
But if there's more data being employed, such that you will have to refine the conclusions, I don't think that's like something that's blameworthy. I think that's something that should be done.
Do you think that in your framework there is enough adaptation to when there's new data being provided?
Yes.
Or do you think that when you stick with the religious framework, it's more rigid into everything's been written down in like 1,200 years ago, right? Where there was less knowledge available. So should you then stick to that framework? Everything, because if you look at the Bible, for example, 2,000 years ago, there's lots of different frameworks around slavery, about women's rights, right?
Yeah.
So should you then stick to these religious frameworks, or should you, in modern society, update that and see it through a more modern?
Yeah, I would say that the fact that we see it from a more modern scope is in itself the evidence for the religion being true. Because without a modern scope of, for example, discovering these pyramid texts or having these scientific studies that show that Islam corresponded to reality prior to the discoveries, is in of itself proof that our model is essentially going to be flexible, such that it adapts for these modern discoveries, such that it explains the data better, such that it will prove theism in a specific sense.
Can I interrupt before I just disappear?
Yeah.
Do you believe, like some Muslims, that Aisha was 6?
Yeah, so when it comes to Aisha radiallahu anha, and just give me a second, are you okay with the, are you happy with the conversation?
I'm going in there. I just have
Yeah, this is amazing. You guys chose that.
Feminism back 50 years.
So just
not
actually, please.
feminist.
One man up. One man says feminism.
So you probably chose the worst person to speak to. I'm actually like a Muslim apologist. My name is the Muslim Apologetic on TikTok and YouTube. So when it comes to Aisha radiallahu anha, the premise being assumed in the argument. Sorry, brother, please. Barakallah. The argument assumes that the way that humans develop today has to be the same way that humans developed in the past. When you look at a study,
You just said he could see the future.
you
said
no.
that he could see into the future.
No, that's not the point. Just let me land my point, please. We have a study done by Peter D. Gluckman on the evolution and human study, and he argues in his study, who's a non-Muslim atheist, secularist, in a peer-reviewed study in 2006, that today we see that humans, when they hit puberty, there's a mismatch between pubescence and menarche. Meaning, someone could attain pubescence, but not necessarily attain menarche.
That's not true. I don't care what he said. That's not true.
Okay, so we're gonna look at a study because you made a claim. I told you I'm the worst person you could choose in this part. You literally went to the worst person.
No, you're not.
So let's deal with it, because now you're being confronted with the data. Let's see if you're actually willing to confront the data.
One study is not data.
So it's a peer review. Now she's gonna panic. Now she's gonna panic. Bring the camera closer. She chose the wrong person to speak to.
No, I'm not panicking at all.
Yeah, so let's see it.
It's not
Let's see if you're going to panic.
It's not true.
Alright, I'm gonna look at the study.
I don't care what the study says.
So now
It's
you're
not
panicking.
true.
Now you're in a panic mode.
I'm not panicking.
Yeah, so you don't want to accept your atheistic framework where we have a secular with a peer-reviewed study done in 2006. Okay, so here we go. Let's put it up.
But no, it's not. It's just not true.
Panic mode. Amazing.
You're going to now say that she was an adult at 9 when he raped her.
So here we go.
Are you saying that 9-year-old?
But by the way, you're not gonna get me with the
I'm just
speech.
asking if you
So here we go. The study is called evolution, development. You just started condensing my religion. I didn't even insult you. I just said I'm gonna stand your speech.
I'm asking.
So this is called panic mode. This is feminism in its full potential. Okay.
I'm not a feminist.
So again, are you going to engage or not?
No. I'm
So you don't want to engage, right?
I'm telling you.
Would you like to engage?
You're having one study.
No worries.
Where you're going to pretend that it was fine for him to marry.
Okay.
And fondle
So this would be like a this would be like a personal incredulity fallacy, because what you're saying is, do I get to respond? I thought this was like a public platform where people get to express their views. Would you like me to express my views? Okay, so let's see it. Let's see if you're gonna panic. We're gonna speak over me. Okay, let's see it. Let's see how you're just speaking over me now. So I'm gonna try and speak now. Hopefully you don't interrupt. When it comes to this